Hello everybody. This is a video, the third of 3, being recorded for students at Gävle. I'm going to be meeting you shortly. We're using criminological ideas to help us understand aspects of our social work. And this particular talk is on labeling theory. I've got a rather sobering and sinister image here, and we're looking at something going on in a village pond. This is actually an old engraving of a woman being drowned to test whether she is a witch or not. And we'll be coming back to this rather sobering situation later on in my talk. Before I continue talking about labeling theory, a recap of our last video. We were looking at early 20th century approaches to understanding society. And in the early 20th century, sociology was dominated by functionalist approaches. Social phenomena were understood in terms of their role in promoting social stability. So this was something that was stressed in this period. Society was seen as being inherently stable. And if we looked at individual social phenomena, we would ask ourselves, how does that contribute to the stability? And that would often be the consequences of our analysis. It helps stability in this particular way. If you have this functionalist approach to thinking about society, that has consequences for social work. And social work in, say, the post-World War II years in the UK, in America, was dominated by approaches where we would see our client, we would look at our client, our family with problems, or our adult with difficulties, we'd see our client as being maladjusted. They were somehow badly adjusted. They weren't not fitting in to their social environment. And the work with the client would be to effectively change the client to make the client fit in better. And I invited you to think about that. That was social work of the 1950s. Was it okay? You know, does that match our values as social workers in the 21st century? Hold on to that idea. I'm going to move on now to look at other approaches to thinking about deviant behavior. Now, the sociology of deviance really has been changing, and a big break happened in the latter part of the last century. In general, I think you can say sociology became more socially critical in the 1960s and the 1970s. In the UK, we rediscovered poverty and inequality. We hadn't thought about it so much, we started to think about it much, much more. And parallel to this, we had some fascinating new ideas, in particular, my topic today, labeling processes. It really influenced a whole new way of thinking about deviance. So let's have a closer look at this. Labeling. Labeling theorists noted that we as a society, we tag some people with the label of being deviant. We're tagging people. How this process occurs is really interesting to examine. Labeling occurs not through the actual norm breaking itself, but rather through the response of others, police, judges, respected citizens to certain acts. So labeling, a process of tagging people because of their behaviors. So labeling is a funny word. We really are using the concept of the label here. It's just like a label that you may attach to your suitcase. This is indicating that my suitcase is my suitcase. Maybe it's nice for me to give you an example. It's nice to be concrete when you're thinking about social work or sociology. And my example is, I'm going to label myself. Yeah, I don't really have many labels, but you could say, because I'm a British born and Germany based, that I'm a Ausländer. So my label is going to say Ausländer on it. Here, I look up, I've written Ausländer on my label. Bear with me while I try to fix this to my arm. All going well. I've got some sticky tape here ready. It's like an episode of Blue Peter, this. Where am I? Here we are. Okay, now I'm neatly labeled. Labeling is a process. Labeling amplifies deviance, okay? So it makes your deviance stronger. But much deviance does not result in a label, okay? I'm forced to carry my label because I don't speak German perfectly. So when Germans see me, they may think that I'm one of them, but when they hear me, they think, oh, right, he's not one of us. He's an Ausländer. Oops, I've lost my label. It's not that easy in real life. In real life, these things actually stick onto you. They don't normally fall off. Let me try and make it a little bit stronger. That's not a social work thing to do. When people are labelled, they react to this. The labelled person may accept and internalise the label, so I might celebrate the fact that I'm a little bit of a foreigner, whether that's good or bad. In the examples of criminology and deviance, I am a criminal. So the youth that's been offending thinks to himself or herself, I am a criminal, or I am morally disgusting, or whatever it may be. I am different. I am somebody who doesn't belong, whatever it may be. So the labelled person may accept that. The labelled person may try to fight it. I sometimes tell people that actually I'm not a foreigner. I'm naturalised, so I'm one of you. You know, we have options. Either way, the identity of that person is shaped by their label. Their biographical possibilities in the future are going to be shaped by it, limited by it. Okay, so we're talking about a process which amplifies deviance. Much deviance doesn't result in labels. Some deviance does. When people are labelled, they react. They may accept it, they may reject it. Either way, that identity is shaped by their label. And again, this takes us back, of course, to witch hunts in Europe, for example, in America, 17th, 18th century. Often there was no real deviant behaviour. We're talking about people who are labelled as being witches simply because they were unmarried or had a black cat or whatever it may be. It's a particularly frightening example of this process by which some people label others. The example helps us understand a lot about labelling. Who labels who? How does it work? Labelling theorists note how labelling is done. It's done by one person on another person, and it's a means of social control. It's a means of oppression. Labelling theorists note who labels. It tends to be done by the wealthy on the poor. The poor aren't the people labelling. It's normally the rich who are the ones doing the labelling. It's done by men on women, by and large, through history. It's done by the old on the young. Okay, so some people here are much more vulnerable than others. The poor, women, the young. It's done by majority groups on minority groups, by and large. And it seems to be about power and inequality. The process by which someone becomes deviant or an outsider, it's characterized by power inequalities. The deviance in society is that which the powerful among us describe as being deviant. They call the shots. They determine who's going to be described as deviant and who isn't. In other words, we've got some kind of stigmatization process here. And it's not the labelled person that chooses that stigma, it's the people around them that choose that stigma for them. And this stresses a really interesting point. Deviance is very much constructed. In a sense, it doesn't really exist. So because of my foreign accent, in a society which I wasn't born in, I am labelled as an Ausländer. But legally speaking, I'm not. So it's kind of interesting. I have this label, I carry it with me, it's reinforced in various situations, but in a sense, this is something that our society is constructing. Okay? It's not something that's really out there like the burning sun in the sky. Now, this was really inspirational for social work in the 1960s, in the 1970s. What kind of social work might be inspired by these labelling process insights? Actually, a whole bunch, and it really, really is quite exciting stuff. Many approaches try to identify and stop labelling and stigmatization processes. Often the idea would be to stop them, to identify them and stop them very, very early in the person's biography. A nice example for young offenders, you can have a look on the internet for intermediate treatment. It was quite a popular method in probation work, for example, with young people committing offences. The idea would be to do something adventurous with them, outdoor education, that kind of thing, and try and divert them away to what was becoming a criminal identity. And if you want to know more about that, there's a great British film from the 1980s. I can really recommend Alan Clark's Made in Britain. Alan Clark was one of the best British filmmakers of the 1970s, the 1980s. If you haven't heard of him, it's simply because he made films mostly for TV, not for the cinema. But his work is really, really fascinating for social workers to watch. And that film follows the life of a young punk who's very, very vulnerable, very fragile person, but also a very aggressive and violent person. An utterly fascinating narrative. Okay, good. Other social work inspired by this labelling theory. The key modern UK social work theory has to be anti-oppressive practice. When I'm teaching in Germany, it's always a pleasure for me to speak about this because it's virtually unheard of in German social work. Anti-oppressive practice is also informed by an understanding of how our clients are marginalized by stigmatization processes linked to inequality, linked to their disadvantage. See also about a whole field of critical social work. So this is the third of our videos. We started off at the end of our first video with quite left-wing Marxist ideas. We then moved more to the center and had a rather conservative view of society, thinking about functionalist approaches in sociology. Now we're maybe swinging back to the political left, and this is very much left-wing social work that's been shaped by this labelling theory. I hope you've enjoyed this third video. Once again, there's a whole bunch of literature tips for you if you want to read some more. Let's come to a close now. Looking forward to seeing you in my fourth video.